Here we go. So October is sadly over, which means it's seasonal depression time, baby. But it also means that I'm officially done with my October horror marathon that I do every year, where I watch one horror movie every single day of October for a total of 31. Thank you so much to everyone who followed along, who watched my shorts. Much appreciated. And now that it's over, I'm going to have to rank all 31 of those movies from the worst to the best. And this is going to be a bitch to edit, so it's going to take at least a few days from the day that I'm recording this, which is November 1st. Also, and this should go without saying, but I'm going to say this on every tier list or ranking video. This is just my opinion. Film is subjective. People get different things out of movies. People look for different things out of movies. What makes a movie good or bad is different for each person. So keep that in mind when I go through this list. A vast majority of these were first-time watches. I think it was the highest ratio of first-time watches. There were 24 of them. 7 were rewatches. So I really tried to branch out and expand my horizons this year and finally get around to some that people have been telling me to watch for a long time. And I had quite a few of these recommended by my friend Lego, so shout out to her. I'm going to probably mention her a couple more times in this video for a couple different reasons. But shout out to you for that. Thank you so much. And with all that being said, let's get right into it. Number 31 is going to be, unfortunately, much to my surprise, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Now, this is an interesting one because when this movie first came out, people hated it. Critics panned it, audiences hated it, and I feel like a big reason for that was that Michael Myers wasn't in it. They heard Halloween, so they went in expecting Michael Myers. They didn't get that. They were upset, so they decided to hate the movie. The narrative has shifted pretty significantly over the years on this movie to where most people that I know who've seen it actually really like it. So that had my expectations pretty high, and I went into this movie fully expecting to enjoy it. And I will say this. Right off the bat, I was really digging the score. I thought it was really cool. It was kind of like a mix of Christine and The Thing, even though The Thing wasn't scored by Carpenter. It does sound like a Carpenter score. I'll get to that way down the line. Unfortunately, it was all downhill from there because while I really love the concept and the commentary on consumerism, which I knew going in, so I'm like, oh, okay, I think I'm going to dig this, commenting on consumerism. I can totally get into that. Unfortunately, I thought it was executed in a way that I found incredibly boring. I mean, this movie was an absolute slog. It's only an hour and a half long, but it felt way longer. Just there's nothing remotely interesting about any of the things that were playing out. Again, cool ideas, not executed in a way that I found interesting whatsoever. It was totally nonsensical. And it could have been saved with characters that were even remotely interesting or likable. Unfortunately, we didn't get that. These are some awful characters. The main character, I think the actor gave a good performance, but I found his character to be incredibly unlikable. He was a womanizer. There was nothing that endeared me to this guy whatsoever. Did not care about him. Didn't care about his love interest either. And there's a totally unimportant sex scene in there. I thought she gave a pretty bad performance. So this is a movie that had some cool ideas. I went into it thinking I would like it, but the execution just did not land for me whatsoever. And even the score, which I started out liking, got kind of annoying at a certain point when it had like the high pitch beeping, which I honestly thought was like a smoke alarm at a certain point. And then, oh no, this is actually part of the score. So this one did not do it for me, unfortunately, number 31. Number 30 is going to be Dead Ringers. I am very mixed on David Cronenberg from the movies that I've seen from him so far, which is not very many. I do think The Fly is quite good. It's a very compelling, tragic story with great performances and great practical effects. Not a big fan of Dead Zone. I remember liking it a lot more back in the day. I don't really like it now. So I was unsure what I was going to think about this one going in. And while I think that Jeremy Irons is great in the role, 2 different roles, playing 2 different characters, twins, I thought the movie, this is another one that I found incredibly boring. And it's barely even a horror movie. Like, if this is a horror movie, certainly some of the other ones that people say are not horror movies will be, which I will get to. But there's like one or two horror scenes in this movie. The rest of it is like a character study, which I understand what they're doing there, but not much of a plot. It's very, very repetitive, very miserable, very bleak. It's like, okay, I get it. This guy is miserable. Everything sucks. And that gets old very quick. So I just found myself looking at my phone, zoning out, going, man, when is this movie going to do anything? When is it going to turn horror? So I respect the performances and filmmaking, but bored the piss out of me. 29 is going to be Audition. This is a foreign film that my friends really hyped up as being like super extreme and shocking and disturbing in the end. So that had me interested because I'm like, man, what is going to happen? What is so crazy that everyone is talking about it so much? And people even said, don't watch this movie because it's so extreme. So throughout most of the movie, which is admittedly pretty slow, the first 2/3 or so, or 3/4-ish, I don't know exactly where it takes the shift, but takes a turn. But I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of invested only because I am anticipating and trying to figure out what is going to happen at the end of this movie. Once we get there, I don't know if I'm just incredibly not squeamish or if I'm totally desensitized or what, because I thought this stuff that happened in the third act that people have been talking about so much, how crazy and extreme it is, was not that extreme. Like, I was incredibly let down by this. I'm like, it's brutal stuff for sure. Like, it's not stuff that I'd want to happen to me, and there's a couple disgusting things in there, but I don't find it like uniquely extreme or shocking at all. I mean, I've seen movies that honestly were way more extreme, like Saw even and Terrifier. This one just did not bother me as much as it did most people. So because of that, that kind of renders the whole experience pretty underwhelming. So now I look back at the first 2/3, I'm like, man, that's pretty boring. Then the payoff was underwhelming. I don't really understand what was real and what wasn't. Some people like that. I'm not a big fan of that. So this is one that people talked about so much, hyped up so much. My expectations were set so high for how crazy this is going to be, and it totally let me down because brutal stuff for sure, like I said, but I didn't find it uniquely extreme or shocking whatsoever. Number 28 is going to be Cobweb. This one came out this year, and most people seem to not really like it, but there were a few people that I follow and really trust that were like, you know what, give this movie a shot. It's actually not that bad. It's actually pretty good. So I'm like, I'll give it a shot. And I will say that the first half to 2/3 of this movie are pretty well done. Good atmosphere, plants some very interesting seeds. I think that Anthony Starr and Lizzie Kaplan play like the worst parents in the world and play them really well. So I was kind of interested in where this was headed. Unfortunately, once you get into the reveal in the third act and what's been going on this whole time, you get into very generic, forgettable, rushed, just cliche horror stuff, and that kind of lost me. And similar to Audition, kind of rendered the whole experience underwhelming and didn't leave much of an impact on me whatsoever. So because of that, it got dragged down this far, but if it would have stuck the landing, it could have been much higher. Number 27 is going to be the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I watched this in a watch-along with my friends Lego and Rob Fishbeck and Jimmy Nails. I wasn't going to watch this otherwise because knowing my tastes and knowing what types of musicals I tend to like, I did not think I would be a big fan of this movie. I didn't think it would be my kind of thing, and I was right. I mean, look, there are certainly aspects about this movie that I appreciate. I think some of the songs, namely the Meatloaf one, pretty cool. I think that it's well made, well directed. I think that Tim Curry is definitely the best part of this movie. He gives a phenomenal performance, like always. And I totally understand why people who like this type of thing love this movie as much as they do. It just wasn't for me. I mean, when it comes to musicals, especially movies in general, but especially musicals, I need something or someone to latch onto. I need to be invested in the story and characters, and I absolutely was not in this case. So while there were things that I appreciated, I just did not care about anything that was going on. And at a certain point with musicals, it just gets very repetitive and tedious for me. By the time you got to like the third act, I'm like, all right, let's wrap this up. This is getting kind of annoying to me. So Just a movie that I totally respect and appreciate, but is not for me whatsoever. Number 26 is going to be Prince of Darkness. This is the first John Carpenter movie that I watched that I wasn't really a big fan of. There's still a lot of his movies that I have to catch up on, but up until this point, I thought that I was a big Carpenter fan. I watched this, I'm like, I'm not sure I entirely get this one. Like, I think there are some interesting ideas in there with the anti-god and some of the scientific stuff and the dream stuff, which the dream stuff is on its own pretty fascinating and scary. Unfortunately, I didn't really think that these ideas that, again, were interesting on their own came together in a very coherent or satisfying way. So it left me feeling pretty empty afterwards, and a good majority of this movie I found pretty boring, and I did not care for all the scientific jargon. It just kind of lost me at many different points. So another one that I respect aspects about. There's some good ideas in there, but the overall execution didn't really do it for me. Number 25 is going to be another Carpenter letdown for me. I think I watched it like a couple days later, and that is In the Mouth of Madness. Most people seem to really love this movie, and I gotta be honest, I'm not entirely sure I understand why. So I think the premise is very interesting. I think the idea of these creatures and things that this person creates, his stories, this horror writer, his stories are coming to life. That's kind of cool. I like that premise. I was interested in seeing where it was going. And Sam Neill, I like him. He gave a good performance. Unfortunately, once they get to the hotel, it really lost me. I mean, it's just kind of a collection of weird, random, trippy scenes and totally lost my attention. So by the time we get to the end, which there even some things in the end, I'm like, you know what? This could have made for a good movie, but I had tuned out at that point because it had gotten so weird and nonsensical, and there was no interesting plot or through line. I just didn't really care. And Julie Carmen, I believe, is the woman. I haven't seen her in anything else, so I can't really speak to her acting abilities in general, but I thought she was terrible in this movie. Took me out of it on several occasions. Cool idea. Execution left me feeling pretty disappointed and underwhelmed. Coming in at number 24 is going to be No One Will Save You. This movie does some things right that I like, namely Caitlin Dever's performance, who is phenomenal. And she's basically the only actor in the movie for a vast majority of it, and she has to carry these scenes on her own. She does an excellent job at that, and horror is something that I hadn't seen her dive into before this, and she does a great job. Also, I have a huge crush on her. Caitlin, hit me up. But I think that the kind of mix of like horror, like home invasion and also alien invasion stuff was pretty compelling. Once you get into like the second half and the third act of the movie, when they try to bring together the two main plot threads of the movie with the alien invasion stuff and the guilt philosophical stuff that they've dropped hints of throughout the movie, they tried to bring those together, and they did it in a way that did not really land for me, and it started to get kind of slow towards the third act. Another movie that's not that long, but feels pretty long. Then you get into the very ending that just was weird and didn't really work for me. So, interesting stuff in there. Great lead performance, but the final product, I was not a huge fan of. I also thought the no dialogue thing got pretty annoying after a while. I understand why they did it at first, but to me, it felt pretty unnecessary and overdone as it went along. Coming in at number 23 is going to be The Autopsy of Jane Doe. This is another one where you're going to sense a trend with this group of movies here. Very good premise. I love the premise. I love the idea. It starts off very strong, setting up this really interesting, suspenseful mystery of what's going on with this body. Why is there all this weird stuff inside her? Why is all this weird stuff happening around these characters? It was compelling. I was intrigued to find out where this was going to go. And the characters are solid enough to get you invested. I think Brian Cox and Emile Hirsch give really good performances. Unfortunately, the setup was way better than the payoff. Once you get into the answers, why all this stuff is happening, what's really going on, then ultimately how the movie ends up playing out, did not land for me whatsoever. And they make a writing decision with one character that is kind of a trope in horror movies and movies in general that really annoyed me. And I'm like, oh, that's the point where it kind of started to lose me, and then it just kept losing me more and more as it went along. So there's definitely some good stuff in here. Awesome premise. It was so compelling, had a great atmosphere. Then once you get into the reveals and the payoff, totally did not stick the landing for me. Number 22 is going to be Creature from the Black Lagoon, the original one. This was a first-time watch for me, and this is the first of the original monster movies that I watched. I have not seen Dracula or Nosferatu or Frankenstein or any of that. I will rectify that, but I have not yet. Started with this one because my mom wanted to watch it. We did like a group watch. So I think the movie is very well made for its time, especially the underwater shots. Those are incredible. I think that the creature, again, for the time, looks pretty good, but it is pretty obvious from the start watching it now that it's a guy in the suit. And I feel like this movie maybe would have benefited from hiding the creature a bit more, like they did for Jaws and Alien. Like, Alien's also a guy in a suit, but you don't really realize that outside of like one scene. So with this one, you can tell that from the beginning. So it was hard to stay like super invested. That, along with the fact that I am just not really a fan of this old-timey style of acting. Like, I think the acting is good for the time, but you can tell that it's acting. Like, it doesn't feel like real people, and that kind of takes me out of it. Again, that's how everyone acted in this time, but I'm not a huge fan of that. I'm not a huge fan of the pacing of this time. It's only like an hour and 20 minutes long, but feels longer. And I also really don't like this like old-fashioned style of a score that they use, to where it's like really loud and abrasive and repetitive, and it's just so distracting. I'm a big score guy, but those types of scores that are very prevalent in these really old movies, I really don't like. So I appreciate the filmmaking. It is insane that they were able to pull off these underwater shots so well at this point in time. So I respect it, but didn't do a ton for me story or character-wise. I was not super invested, and it's definitely dated in a lot of ways. Number 21 is going to be The Strangers. Another first-time watch that I had kind of held off on for a while for unknown reasons, but finally gave it a shot, and I think this is a solid enough home invasion thriller. It delivers on the stuff you expect and want from this type of movie. The characters are not great, and they try to do some development of them early on in the movie to get you to care about them, and it just didn't really work for me. Maybe because, and look, I've only seen her in a couple things, but from what I've seen from Liv Tyler, I don't think she's a very good actress. Maybe I've just seen the wrong movie so far, but I find it incredibly hard to get invested in her. There's a couple scenes where she does a good job in this movie, but the dialogue with her husband or boyfriend, I can't remember. I think husband. No, they were going to, not husband, boyfriend. Just didn't do much for me. And then once the home invasion starts, solid thrills in there, has a great atmosphere, really good tension. The strangers themselves are very creepy, especially when they're kind of like hiding in the back in the shadows. I found that very effective. Pacing's good, but, it's very generic, very cliched, very predictable for this type of movie. Hits basically all of the beats that you would expect. And the ending left me feeling very empty. It's not like one of those bleak endings like Seven, which I'll get to, which is like, whoa, that was incredible, like really shocking. It's more just, really? That's how it ends? All right, okay. I'm probably going to pass on the sequel because most people say that one's a significant step down. And this was passable as a home invasion thriller. I got what I wanted out of it, but doesn't really do much to stand out for me outside of a couple creepy scenes of the strangers hiding in the shadows. Coming in at number 20 is going to be Creep 2. Now, this one is kind of difficult to talk about before I talk about the first one. It's going to feel kind of weird, which is the first one is quite a bit further up this list. But I found Creep 2 to be not really a horror movie. There's like 10 minutes of horror at the end. I found the first one to be much scarier and much more intense. This one is more of a character study with, honestly, quite a bit of humor in it. It's pretty funny in like a fucked up way. Like, there's some really dark humor in here, but the character that we had in the first one of them comes back in this one, has like a man bun. He's acting like a totally different person, and I found him really, really funny, but he's also really fucked up at the same time. The main character, our lead, our protagonist, is a female in this one, and I liked her a lot. I thought she was a good character. Just like the first one, she makes some very questionable and infuriating decisions. Like, really? You're going to stay here despite all of this information? But at the same time, she's a vlogger. She wants to get the views. So it's like, in this day and age, that's kind of understandable. So frustrating, but also somewhat understandable. Continuing the theme from the first one. And it also, I think, does some interesting character stuff in here. All that being said, the movie is slow and there is not much happening plot-wise for a vast majority of it. I will say this, though. The ending was very unpredictable. Once you got to it, I thought I knew where it was going, and I was wrong. So I really did dig that. Apparently, they're making a third, which, based on how this ended, I don't really understand how they're going to do that and where they're going to go, but I am interested. So I found this to be kind of funny at times, had some interesting dialogue and character stuff, unpredictable, but very little going on plot-wise for a vast majority of the movie, so it didn't keep me nearly as engaged as the first one did. Coming in at number 19 is going to be the Friday the 13th remake. Now, full disclosure, I wasn't really planning on watching a Friday movie this month, but there was a Friday the 13th in October, so I kind of had to. So I went with my favorite one, and that is the remake. I enjoy the hell out of this. It's far from a perfect movie. It has all of the cliches and tropes that basically all the other Friday the 13th movies have, with the shitty characters. Although I will say this, there are a few characters that are not that shitty, first of all. They're actually pretty good. Namely, Jared Padalecki's character and Danielle Panabaker's character, who, by the way, she is just so gorgeous and likable in this movie. I knew her from Sky High up until this point, and then I saw her and I was like, oh, that's cool to see her. She's actually in another movie that I watched this month that I will get to in a couple movies here. But the rest of the characters, very paper thin, very one note, especially Trent. And Trent is one who, like, he is such a dick in the most over-the-top way that it kind of makes him funny. Like, his line, I don't want to, God, this line is so good. I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but let me just say that it's got stupendous in it. So once you hear it, you'll know. Just incredible stuff. So I think that worked because they made him so unlikable that he's funny and you can't wait to see him die. All that being said, I think the movie is very entertaining. There's some awesome kills in here. I mean, some of these, like, I'd kind of forgotten about. I'm like, whoa, that was pretty cool. I really like this version of Jason. He's probably my favorite one. I believe it's Derek Mears. Does a great job. He's big and strong and intimidating and scary, but he's also, like, not super slow. He's kind of fast and athletic as well. I love that. My favorite version of Jason, personally. And some of the negatives, I mean, I don't like some of the writing decisions that you get into in the third act and earlier on in the movie that ultimately plays into the third act. It doesn't quite work for me. Opening scene, though, is phenomenal. Just incredible stuff. So, my favorite Friday movie, far from perfect, far from great cinema, but I have a great time every single time that I watch it. Coming in at number 18 is going to be Fright Night, the original. I've not seen the remake yet, although I am somewhat interested in it, so I might watch it at some point. But this movie is just very entertaining 80s horror. And I am very easy to please when it comes to 80s horror, especially 80s vampire movies. You'll find another one of those higher on this list. But just the overall 80s-ness of this with the pacing and the vibe and the music, I absolutely love everything about that. I think Chris Sarandon is the reason to watch this movie. He is incredible. And this, like, creepy, kind of mysterious, sexy, alluring theme that plays every time he comes on screen is awesome and totally fits the character. And the visuals are cool in this movie. At some points, some of the visuals, some of the practical effects are a bit dated. But I enjoy this one, despite the fact that the acting aside from Chris Sarandon is spotty at best. And once I get into the third act, there's a lot of things that happen that I don't really understand. Gets a little bit too weird and over the top for me. So it is a movie that I enjoy, but it's flawed, and there's another 80s vampire movie that I like quite a bit more that I will get to in a bit. Coming in at number 17 is going to be Freddy vs. Jason. So I guess I technically lied. If you're including this as a Friday the 13th movie or a Jason movie, then this one is my favorite. But of the like official Friday the 13th movies, it's the remake. But including this one's my favorite. I just enjoy the hell out of this movie. This is an annual watch for me, or damn near annual. I didn't watch it last year. But I love watching this one. I actually think the setup, the premise for why these two characters would end up fighting each other is pretty good. They came up with a pretty good idea there. I think it has a good balance of fun Jason stuff. I mean, Jason gets a vast majority of the kills in this movie, which is kind of disappointing to me as a big Freddy fan that he only gets one. But the vibe almost feels more like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. So, as a Freddy fan, as a Nightmare fan, I do like that part of it. And Freddy himself is probably the perfect balance of scary and funny Freddy. Basically, the best he's been since Dream Warriors in that regard. Jason is badass. Another one of my favorite versions of Jason. I do like the remake one better, but this one is pretty cool as well. The final fight is great. I mean, that's what you come to this movie for, and it's phenomenal. There's some cool dream sequences in here. The characters are okay. I contend that they're not the worst characters. They're far from the worst characters in slasher movies, but they're not the best either. A bit too much exposition, and the dialogue for the most part is pretty bad and pretty cheesy, but the movie delivers on what it promises, and that's Freddy and Jason fighting, which it makes for a satisfying experience and an entertaining experience every time I watch this movie. Number 16 is going to be The Crazies. This is the second Danielle Panabaker movie on this list, which I didn't even know going in, and then I saw it and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. This is a movie that has a premise that's very familiar, but some of the individual scenes are executed in a way that we've never really seen before. I thought the car wash scene was really cool and well done. The way the story ultimately plays out, pretty predictable. We've seen this kind of thing before, but is filled with great thrills and intense moments, and the rake dragging scene, which is what this movie is known for, will haunt my dreams forever. I think the characters are pretty solid, honestly, and performances across the board. So nothing like revolutionary or groundbreaking, but an effective thriller that delivered on what it promised. Number 15 is going to be Hereditary. This was a first-time watch for me this month. People are going to be unhappy that it's this low, but I think that this movie is extremely well made, well directed. I think it's very well acted. Toni Collette and Alex Wolff especially are phenomenal. Definitely some creepy scenes in here. I love the themes of loss and grief being explored in this movie. All that being said, I don't think I really want to watch this again. I mean, it's basically 2 straight hours of misery and depression. There's absolutely no levity whatsoever, and there isn't much of a plot for a good part of this movie. I mean, again, I get that it's character work, that it's a character study, and they're exploring these themes, but there just isn't much happening for a good portion of the movie. Then once they get into the third act and you get the reveals of what's going on, it just didn't really stick the landing for me. And if it did, if it would have packed that punch, it would probably be a lot higher. But because it didn't, this is where I have it. So a movie that I really respect and appreciate. It's extremely well made. But because there wasn't a good payoff, in my opinion, and because it's just kind of 2 straight hours of depression, I have zero interest in watching this movie again. And I have very little interest in watching any more Ari Aster movies. I might give Midsommar a shot just to see how weird it is, and because I love Florence Pugh, but you could not pay me enough money to watch Beau is Afraid, because I know there is a 0% chance that I would like it. I know my tastes well enough to know that I will not like that movie, so don't think I'll ever watch that. But I'm glad that I watched Hereditary. I feel like it is a movie that most people have to watch, especially if you call yourself a movie fan and a horror fan. Most people have to watch it in their lives. And maybe it was brought down a little bit by the fact that I was spoiled on the big thing that happens. I already knew about that, so it wasn't very shocking to me, although it was still a very disturbing scene. So Hereditary, this is where I have it. Well made, just won't really have no desire to watch it again. Number 14 is going to be Renfield. Oh, people are going to be so mad about having this ahead of Hereditary. Look, this movie is just so damn fun. And I was told that I wouldn't really like it, or at least I wouldn't fully appreciate it without seeing the original Dracula, which I will do, so I can like retroactively understand some of the stuff that apparently I'm missing. But this movie delivered on everything that I wanted. Nick Cage being Nick Cage, he is awesome as Dracula. He was born to play this type of role. I think Nicholas Hoult is great as Renfield. I really like Awkwafina. I think her performance is good. I don't quite buy her as this specific type of character, and she definitely has a crazy amount of plot armor, but I do enjoy her. And I think that it also delivered on the action. I mean, there's some bloody ass kills in this movie, and I love that. It's also really funny. I was told by, I had heard very mixed things about the humor going into this movie. Almost all of it landed for me, so I thought it was incredibly enjoyable, very gory, very funny, and the performances delivered. The plot is extremely generic. The dialogue isn't very good. It's pretty predictable, but just a very, very entertaining film. Coming in at number 13 is going to be The Monster Squad. This is another movie that's just so damn fun, and this is definitely the most kid-friendly movie on this list. I wasn't going to watch it, but my friend Kyle recommended it. I'm like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. I just had a ton of fun with this movie. I think that the characters, this group of kids, very likable, very charming. The little girl is adorable. The effects are really good for the most part, aside from the scenes with the portal where people are getting sucked in. That looks pretty bad. Aside from that, the effects are really good. There's some fun action in here. I like the discussions about how to kill each creature and talking about like which of these movies they enjoy, which monsters they enjoy. So just a very fun movie with good humor, likable characters, good action. It flies by. So it's not like great cinema. It's not groundbreaking. It's not deep, but I got what I wanted out of it. Very entertaining. Number 10 is going to be Tremors. I guess we are just in this group of movies now that are very entertaining because this also falls into that category. This is, I believe, actually Lego's favorite movie. Definitely not that for me, but I really enjoyed it. I think that Kevin Bacon especially and the rest of the cast really understood the assignment. They are really funny and gave the performances that the movie called for. I think the practical effects, for the most part, are really good. I love the idea that these creatures can attack you from underground, and it makes for a really interesting conflict because the people are always learning new things and adapting and trying to stay away from the creatures and survive for a while longer. But the creatures are also adapting and coming up with new ways to get to these people. So makes for a very compelling conflict and ticking clock. It's very goofy. And the movie knows that. It knows exactly what it is. It's pretty short. It's a very simple and effective horror comedy that will never be like a top movie of all time for me, but I had a blast with it. Coming in at number 11 is going to be Overlord. I remember seeing trailers for this movie when it first came out, thinking this looks pretty cool. Finally got around to watching it this year, and I think it's good, but it could have been a little bit better because I don't think it went nearly far enough with the horror stuff. I was expecting much more. I was expecting way crazier, and if it did fully commit to that, this could have maybe been like a top 5 movie of the month for me. But because it didn't, it's just top at number 11. So I still liked it quite a bit. I think it almost works better as a war movie than it does a horror movie. The action is good. The characters are quite solid, so you're invested in what's going on. Just wish they went a little bit further with the horror, and that would have really taken it over the top for me. But I do think it's a good movie. Number 10 is going to be the original A Nightmare on Elm Street. This is what I would call a flawed classic. I watch this every year, and I enjoy the hell out of it. I think the concept is phenomenal. One of the most unique and terrifying concepts when it comes to horror movies, the idea that this guy can kill you in your dreams, is really scary because there's no escaping that. You have to sleep at some point. When it comes to Jason, when it comes to Michael Myers, you can run away from them. You can maybe maybe kill them. Jason, not really, but you can just not go to Camp Crystal Lake, not go to Haddonfield. So there's ways around that. With Freddy, there isn't. You have to sleep eventually or you're going to die anyway. So that's just a very terrifying concept. Freddy himself is horrifying, and this is the first movie is the one where he is, maybe the second one, but he's terrifying in this. And he is not funny at all. There's like a couple funny lines, but he is almost entirely just scary Freddy in this one. And part of me prefers when there's the balance of scary and funny Freddy, but when it comes to just purely scary Freddy, extremely effective in this one. I think Nancy is a really good final girl. One of my favorites, honestly. I actually prefer her to Laurie Strode, which is a massive hot take. But I do really like Nancy. There are some great practical effects in here. I won't say who if you haven't seen it, but the first death in the movie is very well done, and it's crazy that they were able to pull that off so well at the time. The score is great. I think it is a very underrated horror score, and I listen to it all the time. Very creepy, very effective. All that being said, first of all, I don't think the acting is very good for the most part. Nancy's mom in particular is god-awful, completely takes me out of the movie every time she's on screen. And then once you get into the third act, it just gets very nonsensical. They break their rules multiple times, and no matter which theory I try to come up with, which way I try to interpret everything that plays out in this third act, there's something that contradicts it. So there's just not really much that makes sense about that third act. And then you get the big final scare with the blow-up doll being pulled through the window, which I thought was really dumb. So great premise, lots of great stuff in here, had a really good atmosphere, love the concept and love the villain. Didn't really stick the landing. Third act didn't make much sense, and there's some pretty bad acting from some of these actors. So for that reason, it is a flawed classic number 10. Number 9 is going to be The First Creep. Now, this is another recommendation from Lego. I was very, very hesitant. I was like, I don't like found footage, but she said, watch a trailer and then decide. I did, and I'm like, you know what? This looks pretty compelling, so I'm going to give it a shot, and I'm glad I did, because despite the fact that I normally hate found footage, I despise the Blair Witch Project. If you watch this video from last year, you know that. But I was barely bothered by the found footage outside of one scene, and I thought it was very effective little thriller, very creepy. This character of Joseph is one of the creepiest characters I've ever seen in a movie, hence the title, and very realistic as well, which is what makes it scarier. Aaron, our protagonist, makes some very questionable decisions, just like the one in the second one. But also, they portray him as this guy who's very trusting and very naive, so kind of makes sense because there are people like that in the real world. Great atmosphere, great tension, and it builds from start to almost finish. Honestly, if the movie would have kept that tension throughout the entire movie, it could have been top 5 on this list, but there's a certain point, like right before the third act, where it kind of lets the air out of the balloon a little bit and that tension is gone. So it was a bit of a drag through the rest of the movie until the very end, which was great and extremely effective and definitely will stick with me for a while. There's a couple images in this movie that will stick with me for a long time. If you've seen it, you certainly know what I'm talking about. So it's just a very effective thriller that builds tension really well, and I was surprised how little the found footage bothered me in this one. Number 8 is going to be one of my biggest surprises of the year, and that is Totally Killer. I didn't even know what this movie was until like the day before I watched it. My dad actually sent it to me. He's like, this looks pretty cool. I'm like, you know what? It does. And I was told by people that got to see it early that it's like a mixture of Scream and Back to the Future. I'm like, if anything is up my alley, that is it. Like, that sounds awesome. And I dug the shit out of it. I thought it was a lot of fun. It absolutely delivers on that promise of being a mix of those two movies. I love the commentary on the 80s and how just ridiculously, like, casually racist and sexist and over the top and toxic masculinity and all that stuff was portrayed so well in such a funny way. It poked fun at the 80s at the same time as you can tell they also like the 80s, so it maintains that balance really well. It also pokes fun at kids from our current time, from the 2020s, and I love the comparing and contrasting of the different cultures from these two times. That was brilliant. If we don't get another Back to the Future movie, this movie kind of covered that, honestly. And then you get some horror moments as well in there, which I thought were pretty effective. I think the main character is compelling. The one thing that holds this movie back, the one problem I have with it, is that the whodunit aspect, well, I think it was well done throughout most of the movie. The way it concludes was very underwhelming. Because without getting into too much detail, part of it was like impossible to predict, and the other part of it was extremely predictable. So if they would have stuck the landing with that, it would be even higher on this list. The time travel itself, I mean, the way that they actually go back and forth between time doesn't really make any sense. However, the logistics of how it actually works, as far as like if you do something in the past, how it affects the future, I love that. And that's one of my favorite versions of that. So an incredibly entertaining movie that gives some great social commentary on the cultural differences between the 80s and the 2020s. Very funny, very well-paced and entertaining, and has some fun horror action in there. Didn't stick the landing, but I had a great time with this one. Number 7 is another huge surprise for me this year, and that is Saw X. This is probably my favorite Saw movie now, which I would have never guessed considering I really love the first. I might still have the first one ahead of this, but I found this to be very effective. They finally made John Kramer the main character, which is like, thank you. Like, why did you not do this before? And it's a character study of him, and he gets ultimately screwed over by these people and takes revenge on them. So, unlike any of the other Saw movies, or at least more so than them, once we get to the traps, which are good, you really hate these people that are in the traps, especially one of them, and really want to see these people pay for what they did. So you finally get what the Saw franchise is supposed to be, which is John Kramer putting all these bad people in traps and testing them. And they did a great job of getting you to hate these people so much based on what they did that you want to see them suffer and want to see them die. Kramer is delved into as a character better than any of the other movies did. For the first part of the movie, it's a character study. Then you get to the horror stuff, which is very effective. So this one was shocking to me how much I liked it. And there's a couple things. I don't know if I love every aspect about the ending, but this movie was so much better than I expected. It absolutely delivered on basically everything that I want out of a Saw movie, and finally made John Kramer the main character, made us sympathize with him so well, made us hate these villains so well. So totally delivered for me. Number 6 is going to be The Final Girls. This is one that came out quite a few years ago, but I had not seen it up until this point. I heard that it was fairly similar to Totally Killer, and I actually like this quite a bit better than not quite a bit better, but a little bit better than Totally Killer, which is saying a lot because I enjoyed the hell out of Totally Killer. This one has sort of a similar premise in that you have a character from the current time going back to the past, but instead of going back to the real past, she goes back to the past, a movie universe in which her mom is playing a character, her mom, who is now dead, is playing a character in that movie. So she's interacting with the character, not her actual mom, which I thought that was really cool and really unique. And the movie is really funny. I love how they poke fun at the ridiculous, over-the-top nature of the characters in these movies. Adam Devine was awesome. I can't remember the other chick's name, but like the dumb chick, she was super funny as well. And I think that the reason this one works just a little bit better for me is, first of all, the idea of being in the movie universe is really cool. And through the character interactions between our main character, played by Taissa Farmiga, who does a great job, and the character that her mom plays, you kind of get closure between her and her mom in a way that you don't really expect. And I thought it was just done in a very unique and interesting way, and they made for a very emotional movie, much more emotional, had way more heart than I expected. And I will never hear the song Betty Davis Eyes the same again. I will always get emotional when I hear that. This movie just totally delivered and was so much better than I expected. So that's why it is ranked where it is. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Train to Busan. I expected to like this movie, but I liked it way more than I thought I would. This is now in competition for my favorite zombie movie, probably up there with Zombieland and Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, which is also great. But this one not only has great zombies, this is probably my favorite version of zombies on screen. They're aggressive and they're actually fast, which I love. I've always hated the slow zombie thing, so I love that they're fast and aggressive and strong, but they're also not smart whatsoever, and their main characters are able to find ways to outsmart the zombies on multiple occasions. I thought that was really cool. It makes for some really interesting conflicts because they're trying to get from one side of the train to another, or one end of the train to another, but the zombies are in between them. That makes for compelling conflicts. I think the characters were very solid, and our main character goes through a really good arc. The ending is very bittersweet. The action is great, although honestly, I don't think there was nearly as much gore as I expected. They didn't actually show that much, so I wish there was a little bit more in that regard. But I enjoyed the hell out of this movie. It is immediately in competition for my favorite zombie movie, and because of the specific ways the zombies were portrayed, because of the character work and the performances, that elevates it above just being a fun zombie movie to a very, very good one. Coming in at number 4 is going to be a movie I alluded to before, and that is The Lost Boys. Oh my God, do I love this movie. This is by far and away my favorite vampire movie. I talked about the fact that Fright Night is very 80s. This is probably even more 80s. Between the soundtrack, which is awesome, between the way the characters look and talk and interact with each other, and just the overall vibe of the movie, it is so 80s in all the best ways. Whenever people ask me, like, Kurt, why do you like the 80s so much? Why do you wish you were around for that time? I will point to this and the first Terminator. Not the Terminator being there, but like the club, tech noir and stuff like that. Just the overall vibes. I'm like, this is just so awesome. This is so my kind of thing. I think the characters are really good. I think Michael is a great lead. I think his brother Sam, played by Corey Haim, rest in peace, is also great. The vampires are compelling. I think that Kiefer Sutherland is so awesome and cool and mysterious as David. And Star is fucking gorgeous. Like one of the most beautiful women in any movie ever. Totally understand why Michael immediately fell in love with her. It's got some really good gore. It's got some great action. It's really funny, and like all of the humor lands. The Frog Brothers are absolutely hilarious. A good portion of the humor comes from them. Corey Feldman is awesome as Edgar Frog, and I just love the way he deepens his voice to like sound like Batman. Like, oh my God, just so perfect. The only knock I really have against this movie is that the third act, how it plays out, and then the big reveal, pretty predictable. Like I saw where that was going, and then wasn't super. It was a bit underwhelming, but that's like the only thing I can really throw at it. There's so much to love about this one. I was just listening to the soundtrack last night for like the last couple hours of October. I didn't want October to end, so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to spend these last few moments that I have just listening to this awesome soundtrack on repeat. This movie is such a damn vibe, and not only is it really funny, not only is it incredibly entertaining with great characters, it's also genuinely scary at moments. And I think, I don't want to give away what's specifically happening in this scene, but if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. The Walk This Way scene is extremely effective. It is like terrifying and awesome at the same time. And there's one kill in that scene in particular. Again, not going to give it away, but if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It's really quick, but it's really brutal. When I watch it again, I'm like, oh man, that's rough. If you've seen it, you know. Once you watch it, you'll know. So just an awesome, awesome vampire movie. And I said that Train to Busan is my favorite version of zombies. This is my favorite version of vampires. Damn near everything works about this movie. It's such a vibe, incredibly entertaining, incredibly rewatchable, and gets better with every watch. Speaking of getting better on every watch, number 3 is going to be Get Out. I thought this movie was good before, but man, it shot way up on this most recent rewatch. I appreciate it way more because when you're watching it for the first time, you're kind of invested in this mystery, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. But it almost works even better on rewatch because you know the reveal. You pick up on so many little details and little hints dropped throughout the movie. It has brilliant foreshadowing. It's not stuff that gives it away when you watch it for the first time, but when you watch it on rewatch, you're like, oh, that is just so good. Jordan Peele, you fucking genius. This is still his best movie to me by quite a large margin. I think this is the one where he best delivered on his vision and his themes, and the social commentary is communicated so well, so brilliantly through story. And the ultimate reveal goes maybe a little bit too far, but not to the point where it takes me out of it like Us did. Like Us, once you find out what's going on, made no sense. This one, maybe just a tiny bit, but not to the point where it took me out of it, and it landed as far as what he was trying to say. So this movie works in every single way. Daniel Kaluuya's main character, Chris, is incredibly compelling. It's so important to have an interesting main character to follow for these types of movies. This one absolutely has that. The dialogue is so sharp, whether it's the serious dialogue or the satirical dialogue or the comedic dialogue. Lil Rel Howery is hilarious. Most of the comedy in the movie comes from him, and he brings some much needed levity to this movie. Every line from him is just absolute gold. Allison Williams is fantastic, and the way she just changes on a dime like that, oh man, just chilling stuff. The scene where Chris is asking her to get the keys is incredibly intense, and rewatching it, I was getting chills, even though I knew exactly what was going to happen. Probably even more so because I knew exactly what was going to happen. Bradley Whitford is amazing as well. The commentary on these white, old, liberal people and their obsession with black people, like fascination and fetishization with them, so brilliant. This movie is so well done, and I appreciate it more and more every single time that I watch it. Coming in at number 2 is going to be The Thing. Now, my top 2 is going to be basically the same every year because I watch these 2 movies every year. Number 1 certainly always going to be the same because it's my favorite movie of all time. There's like maybe a couple movies that if I watch them, they could sneak ahead of The Thing. Like this is a hint at one of them. But The Thing is phenomenal. And I've talked about it quite a few times, but let me just give a summary about why I love this movie so much. I think that it is everything that I want out of a horror movie. The score is fantastic. The score won a Razzie, which is so crazy to me because it is great. So simple, so effective. Not done by Carpenter, but very much sounds like a Carpenter score. It fits with the movie and elevates the feeling of unease and isolation. The isolation in general in this movie is so well done because a lot of horror movies do the isolation thing and do it well. But because I'm someone who hates the cold and the snow so much, being trapped out there in the cold and the snow is extra terrifying to me. The characters are good. I think Kurt Russell's MacReady and Keith David's Child, definitely the standouts. They're awesome, give great performances, compelling characters. I think that the practical effects are still the gold standard, even 40 years later. Absolutely phenomenal. The Thing itself, like some of these images they come up with for what it looks like, because it looks different every single time that you see it, which is part of what makes it so terrifying. It doesn't have any single defined form. You get the dog thing, you get the walking spider head thing, you get the giant thing at the end. Looks different every time you see it. I don't know how they came up with some of this stuff, just such creepy imagery, and the fact that it can imitate any one of these people is horrifying, and you don't trust anyone, which plays into what I think is what the movie is really about, the most important aspect of the movie, and that is the theme of paranoia that sets in once these people realize that the Thing can imitate and impersonate any one of these people and they can never tell. It's a perfect imitation. They can never tell who's the thing and who's real. So that causes nobody to trust anyone. They all start turning on each other. Basically, the thing is able to destroy these people from the inside. Ultimately leads to an ending, which I won't spoil, but I do have a very strong theory about what that ending means that I think works both logically and thematically with the theme of paranoia that is present throughout this entire movie. Incredibly well done. Oh my God, it's got two of the best jump scares of all time with, if you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to give it away. Two excellent jump scares that are like, they're not cheap jump scares. They're earned and they're part of the story and what's going on. So much to love about this one. It's got an incredible atmosphere, incredible premise, great body horror, great practical effects. The only thing I can really hold against this movie is that some of the dialogue and acting and line delivery from a few of the side characters, not very good. That's about the only issue I have with this one. Other than that, it absolutely delivers on everything that I want out of a horror movie and is by far and away my favorite John Carpenter movie and one of my favorite horror movies and movies in general of all time. But coming in at number 1 is going to be Seven. This is going to be number 1 every single year on this list because it's my favorite movie of all time and I watch it every single October. Now, before I talk about the movie itself, which I have already done ad nauseum, but I still want to do again, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the common idea, the common notion that this movie is not a horror movie, which I've never understood. Look, it's totally fine for people to define horror differently and what makes a movie horror and what doesn't, but based on my understanding of how we horror fans, movie fans define horror movies, the common consensus of what elements constitute a horror movie, I do not understand how this is not a horror movie. I mean, between the cinematography, the themes, the subject matter, the specific way in which these victims are killed, there's some jump scares in here, the atmosphere of the movie, and the big one for me is the score. I don't know how you can listen to this score and tell me this is not a horror movie. Literally one of the creepiest, eeriest, most horror-y scores of all time. And even the opening credits, that is pure horror to me. Like, just anecdotally, when I watch this for the first time and we get to the opening credits, I'm like, to my dad, who I'm watching it with, is this a horror movie? And he's like, yeah, honestly, it is. And then here's a hypothetical for you. So if you have a friend who's watching this for the first time and they ask you, is this a horror movie? And you're so adamant to them, nah, don't worry, it's not a horror movie. I feel like they're going to be thrown off by a lot of things that happen in this movie. As far as I'm concerned, if a movie has horror elements, at least this many horror elements that this movie does, it is absolutely a horror movie. Another shout out to my friend Lego who put it this way. If you find yourself questioning whether or not it's a horror movie, then it is horror. And I completely agree. That's the best way to think about it. Now, an argument I'll commonly hear is, well, it's not a horror movie, it's a crime thriller. Dude, it can be all the above. The beautiful thing about movies is there is no limit to the amount of genres a movie can have. A movie can have 10 genres if it wants to, if it fits into all those genres. That's the beautiful thing. So if you want to try to argue down below that it's not a horror movie, I completely disagree. But if you want to try to do it, go ahead. But please don't just tell me it's not horror, it's this. There's no such thing as it's something else. That's not a thing because there is no limit to the amount of genres a movie can have. It can be crime and thriller and horror and noir and mystery all at the same time. So you have to tell me specifically why it isn't a horror movie, not because it's actually this. It can be both. It can be 5 genres. It can be 10 genres. It can be 15 genres if it wants to. So this has just always been so baffling to me. I will never understand it. If this isn't a horror movie, then half the movies on this list are not horror movies. If fucking Dead Ringers is horror, Seven is absolutely horror. Sorry, just wanted to rant about that real quick. I'm not actually mad at people, but I just get passionate about this, and an argument that I don't really understand. I seriously don't. If all these other movies are considered horror, how the hell is Seven not horror? And it can't be because it's something else. No, you have to tell me specifically why it isn't, because a movie, again, can be as many genres as it wants to be. Okay, with that out of the way, the movie itself, to me, is basically the only perfect movie I've ever seen. I can't level a single criticism at this one. There is not a single scene or performance or line of dialogue that I would take out of this one. I love the themes of cynicism versus optimism that are present throughout the movie and are kind of portrayed through the characters of David Mills and William Somerset, who are at very different points in their career. And Somerset, he's so jaded and cynical. He's seen everything. Mills is green, and he thinks he can change the world for the better. And the conversations these two characters have about their differing ideologies are so damn compelling. They're both so well fleshed out, two of the most well fleshed out, well developed characters in a single movie that I've ever seen. Obviously, with like Iron Man or something, he gets like several movies to get developed, so he's going to be more developed than these two. But when it comes to one movie, some of the best character development I've ever seen. These two guys that are at very different points in their career and have vastly different worldviews, and the discussions they have about that are so interesting. I love the subplot with Somerset and Mill's wife, to where they become friends, even though they only have a few interactions. Those are so well done. The movie has an incredibly compelling main plot about this serial killer who's killing people in very unique and disturbing ways, going along with the themes of the 7 deadly sins. There's a mystery there to where, what's he going to do next? What's the next death going to be like? And it takes multiple twists and turns throughout the movie. It subverts your expectations and the tropes of the typical, serial killer investigation movie at every single turn. The setup could have been a very generic, very familiar serial killer investigation movie, but because the characters are so well developed, because at every turn they subvert those tropes and expectations, because the victims are killed in such unique ways, because it is so well shot. I mean, this movie is almost 30 years old and looks like it could have been made today. It looks incredible. That's Fincher for you. So proficient. Score is incredible. There's even a couple like actual songs in this movie that are extremely well placed. It's extremely bleak and eerie throughout the entire runtime, but also has some moments of levity in there that come through the character interactions. And of course, the shocking ending, which is what really leaves an impression on you once you watch this movie for the first time. One of the most shocking endings I've ever, probably the most shocking ending to me of any movie I've ever seen. Like, for example, even though the movie doesn't show very much, which is, I think makes it better because it leaves all this stuff up to your imagination to imagine how this went down, to picture it in your head. That's terrifying. That's more terrifying to me than showing this stuff. Philosophical stuff, psychological stuff, concepts bother me more than visually seeing things do. So that's why this movie leaves such an impression on me. Just to compare to Audition, for example, this one was way more shocking and way more disturbing to me, despite the fact that they hardly show anything. But it's the concept, knowing what happened, that is so disturbing, and what it does to one of the characters. Oh my God. I can go about this movie. I can go on about this movie for hours and hours. It's perfectly executed in every single way. There isn't a single thing that I would change about it. To me, it's a perfect crime, thriller, horror, noir, mystery movie. All the above. It's perfect. Seven is absolutely my number one on this list and my favorite movie of all time. So there you go, guys. There is my ranking of all 31 horror movies I watched this past October, from the worst to the best, or better, from my least favorite to my favorite, because again, it is just my opinion. What do you think of my list? Drop a comment below. Which horror movies did you watch this month? I'd love to have a conversation about that, so drop a comment about that. And if you enjoy this video, hit the like button. Likes are so important for helping me grow my channel, push my videos out to more people. If you want to see more of this kind of stuff, subscribe, hit the notification bell to get notified. I'm tired, guys. Sorry. subscribe, hit the notification bell to get notified when I post a video, and stay tuned. I got some more stuff coming. I'll see you soon.